I think what's coming to me is for everyone listening to know that you're not alone. But if it's a struggle or a feeling of like coming back around to the same pattern, to know that when we talk about it, when we give it the light of day, it's like total release mechanism for deeper healing. And that, there might be some habits or belief systems programmed into you. I know perfectionism is a big one that'll keep you down, or that voice telling you, you suck or you can't do this or whatever it is. So I encourage you to talk about it in safe and brave spaces, because that will really be the healing path.
Hey everyone, I'm Thais Sky. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women by women on conversations that matter. Hello everybody, Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim, the podcast. I'm so excited to be here with another episode for you all. And just FYI, we are slowly but surely getting close to the end of season 2 of Reclaim. We have about 4 episodes left after this one, so it's going to take us through the end of May, and then we're going to close the season. And season 3 will be available mid-July, roughly. I'm still playing with the dates, but during that month and a half, I'm going to be doing some traveling. I'm going to be celebrating my birthday. I'm going to be focusing on the ending of Worthy Women Rise and getting together all the materials for the launch of Worthy Women Rise in the fall. I got a lot going on, so that month and a half break is going to be a really important hiatus from the podcast, so I can really focus on those things. But that means that we have, including this episode, 5 amazing Reclaim episodes for you all. You are in for a treat this week. I have Becca Piastrelli on. Becca is someone that I found online through an article that I share in the show notes. The article title is called How to Connect with Your Ancestral Lineage, and I really enjoy Becca's perspective on connecting with our ancestors, particularly how we can develop a relationship with our ancestors when our ancestors were colonizers, oppressors. And so she takes a really beautiful look into her past and does the work of really marrying these two different these seemingly different concepts into one. You're going to have to listen to our conversation if you want to learn more. But let me introduce you to Becca. Becca Piastrelli is a writer, women's coach, and host of the Belonging podcast. She holds space for women to explore ancestral wisdom, connect with the earth, and find meaningful and inclusive sisterhood. In the age of loneliness, Becca shows us how to feel like we truly belong to each other, to the earth, to a lineage, and to ourselves. You can learn more about Becca at beccapiastrelli.com. You can also go to my show notes to get all the links for her, including her Instagram, which is instagram.com/Becca Piastrelli. And so as you're listening to this episode, I would love for you to be thinking about your own relationship with your lineage / your ancestors. For me personally, I never really connected with this idea of lineage, ancestors. It just felt like I don't know where I come from. I don't know anything beyond my grandparents, and I don't know if I need that to belong, But as I started doing the work of kind of tending to my own inner softness, to tending to my inner child, to softening into my life, I started to recognize that, we are deeply connected with the people who have come before us. And while I think so many of us, while we're young in our teens and early 20s, we kind of think that we're invincible and that we're never going to die and that we have a long life ahead of us, and who needs these old farts of our parents and our grandparents, right? I think that that's many of our understanding of lineage when we're young. I think as we start to get older and we start just getting slowly closer to death, I'm not saying that I'm right there yet, but we start to recognize the wisdom of those who have come before us. We start to recognize that there is so much wisdom in our history, in the history of the world. If we just look at a few documentaries from what happened in the 60s, not even that long ago, we'll see that so much of what we're experiencing now has been experienced in the past. And that gives us some hope that if they made it through, then we can make it through. And so connecting to our ancestors, connecting to our lineage is really about recognizing that so many people have come before us and paved the way for our life, for us to live the life that we live now, right? So many people must have fought hard lived through adversity, navigated some really, really hard shit in order for us to be here where we are today. And whatever level of recognition we want to give our lineage, our ancestors, it's important that we at least give a little. And in that connection, in connecting to our ancestors, we start to connect to the land in which our ancestors came from. When we connect to our ancestors, we start to connect to rituals that they embraced. We start to see the world in a slightly different lens, one in which we've been here for a very, very, very long time, as opposed to believing that we're just these fleeting bodies or just these meat sacks that come and go. We're actually connected to something very deep and very wise. And so connecting to our lineage, our ancestors, they can look different for different people. Becca talks about what it looks like for her. I talk a little bit in the interview what it looks like for me. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean like having to go across the world to find out where your great-grandparents are from, but it could, you know. But even little things like asking stories from your family about their grandparents and asking our grandparents about stories about their grandparents, right? Getting to know a little bit more about the lineage. And if you're not connected to your family or you were adopted, right? If you don't have any connection with your bloodline, that's okay. There are ways we can do that through like DNA testings, but there's also ways that we can do that simply by connecting to the family that we are from, right? Because they must have gone through so much adversity in order to get to where we are. And if that doesn't connect with you, then what does it look like to at least feel in your bones the people who have come before you? Okay, so enough about that. If you are interested in learning more, Becca has a plethora of resources available online. You can also do a lot of Googling, you can do a lot of searching. But as you're listening, I really wanted you to be thinking about your own relationship with your ancestors, your lineage. What does it mean to have ancestors who were both oppressed? Like the women line in our lives were predominantly oppressed, but also the men's line, and the fact that so many of our ancestors do come from white backgrounds, and that means that they were part of a group of people who oppressed, right? So what does that look like? How can we hold those two things? So I want you to be thinking about that as we listen to Becca's wisdom. Let's bring her on. Hello, Becca. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you for saying yes. I'm a big fan of your work. I think we share a lot of similar ideas of life, and I think we see things very much in alignment. And so I'm just so excited to have a conversation with you and see where it goes and what comes up.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's dive in.
Do it. Okay. So before we started recording, I asked you what topics are on your heart and mind, and the last thing that you said, I think we should just start there because I think that's going to lead into everything else that we discussed as well. So, you shared that you would be interested in talking about, the fact that you are descendants of colonizers and that you've been doing a lot of investigations in that. So let's start there. What does that look like? What does that mean? What have you been discovering?
Yeah, so I think in my own awakening to being someone who has really benefited from colonization and white privilege, I noticed when I would talk to my family about, are we descended from people who enslaved folk, or were we the ones who did the bad things? I got a lot of, well, you can't really be responsible for what dead men did, or probably not. We were too poor. This sort of like revisionist history of just like, no. And I just always sort of thought, I wonder if that's true. And so the more I felt emboldened to really embody allyship, the more I felt the shame. The more I felt the shame, the white woman's shame that keeps me quiet, and feeling unworthy and all that stuff, and not really
Yeah.
standing up and using my privilege. And so I went on a journey. I've been on this journey. I'll be on this journey for my entire life, but I began it a few years ago when I decided to really connect with who I came from, who and what I come from. So this includes, I take ancestral pilgrimages to the European, what is now known as European lands that I am descended from, and doing genealogical research and having hard conversations with living ancestors about who and what I come from. And my mom got super into it, very happy about that. And we uncovered many things. So I can say openly, I think it's very healing for me to say openly that I am descended from the original settlers of Abenaki land, what is known today as the state of Maine in the United States on Turtle Island. And the story was in my family that I am descended from the folks who built the ships that won the American Revolution.
Mm.
But the truth is, I'm descended from the folks who enslaved the people that built the ships that, quote, won the American Revolution. And I took an ancestral pilgrimage to Maine last summer where we found the record of the
Wow.
enslaved people. Very intense experience.
Yeah.
But I found the truth. I found the truth. And the digging from there became very clear. You know, I found records of killing Abenaki Native people. And then I found records showing that I'm descended from the presiding judge over the Salem witch trials. That one was an intense realization. So I have been feeling that, being with that, and asking myself, what am I going to do with the fact that all of these folks lived and I am alive today? What am I going to do with that? Am I going to hide in shame because of that? Am I going to pretend it didn't happen? Am I going to dissociate from these dead men and probably some women too, and just be like, well, I'm here now and I'm not them? And I'm thinking, no, I'm going to share this. I'm going to share this. And I want to say that I'm sure this can bring up a lot for whoever's listening, and I'm holding what it brings up for me, which is a feeling of shame and also a real fire to be a better ancestor and be a better neighbor, and know and tell the history so that I can shift with this culture that I very much feel is shifting in the way that it's shifting. It's painful and it's fiery and it's hard, but I'm here for the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and it's just so interesting that, you know, there is a conversation around healing our relationship with our ancestors and healing ourselves by developing a relationship with our ancestors, and how tapping into our lineage can help us in our sense of belonging. And so how to hold those two things of, like, on the one hand, you know, connecting to our ancestors and the powerful beings that have come before us and paved the way towards the life that we now have is such a gift and can give us such a sense of belonging. And then what happens when we realize through our unearthing, like you have, that your ancestors were also colonizers and participating, you know, directly in the systemic oppression of Indigenous and Black people. You know, how can we hold these both things to be true?
I think in order to do this work, you must hold those two things to be true. It's the embodiment of the oppressor and the oppressed, whatever your mix, your percentage is. We can't actually know 100%. Each of us has like over 6 billion ancestors who came before us and are woven into our DNA. And I think to do this work of reconnection, to do this lineage work, which is different for every single person, and there's various levels of privilege, and you know, we could talk about the DNA test, and we could talk about genealogical records, and there's various ways to do it. And I always say to start with yourself, with what you know to be true, with your dreams, with where you're called, because this is a lifetime's journey, and it's tender and it's intense. And we have the DNA and resilience of all of our bright and well ancestors who come in a good way, whispering behind us to do it, to be better, to do better. We are alive in this time where we have more access and we have more abilities than they did, no matter who you come from, that we can do this work.
I love that. Well, and for people who don't quite understand what it means to connect to our ancestors and why that can be such an important part of our healing, I would love to hear a little bit about what your experience has been like in terms of the healing component. Well, actually, understanding that our ancestors are part of the oppressive system, I think, can be healing in and of itself. But I want to separate that for just a minute, and then we can integrate them back together and talk about, how connecting to your ancestors have allowed you to find a sense of belonging within yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think so. It all started with feeling a longing for a home that wasn't where I lived. And I think as someone, most, but not all of us, don't live on our ancestral homelands, and that can be very complicated because we have, throughout history, throughout time, and migration and war and famine and all of it, oppression, that, our ancestors have had to move around. But I for sure can say that I am not, native to Northern California in any way, which is where I live. And I love it very much here. And I also have never quite felt that home feeling, that sense of belonging. And I found myself like watching Outlander or watching Downton Abbey and feeling a stirring, like feeling some sort of a stirring. So that was like the beginning for me, where I was like looking at what is home and how I can live here and also connect to all the lands, the physical lands. A lot of my work has to do with connecting with the natural world as a way to remember that all of us are descended from people who once wove easily their lives and their beliefs and their ways of being with the natural world, with the seasons and the cycles and the plants and the trees and all of it, the moon, the stars. And so I was feeling a land calling to places that I had never been. And so I had the privilege of going and continue to. I remember I went to Ireland a few years ago, and what that helped me realize is ancestral connection can be, missing a beloved grandmother and putting her photo, a past grandmother, and putting her photo on an altar or in a prominent place of your home and whispering her name and sending her love and giving her prayers and blessings. It certainly can. And for me, I'm saying this because it can be very different. It's very personal for every single person. For me, it's the nameless, faceless ones that I can feel when I really lean into that craving, that yearning, that pain, that wanting of feeling home. It's wanting to feel the collective grandmothers and grandfathers standing around me that I come from. It feels very comforting. It feels very safe. I'm not someone who grew up in a huge family that had a great deal of feeling like safe and cozy. I mean, my favorite movie growing up was My Big Fat Greek Wedding because I felt culture and I felt connection in that story. And so I realized that's what I was craving. And so it's not a linear path, but it's certainly what has been my story.
Yeah. It's really interesting. A lot of people around the world see Americans as without culture. And seeing how so much of people around the world have a connection to their lineage, their family line, that's very different than our experience in America. But now, that I have a deeper understanding of systemic oppression and the ways in which white people live here in the United States, I think what we're seeing is not that Americans don't have culture, but it's actually that white Americans don't have
Mm,
culture. And it's not that we don't have culture, it's that I think we don't know who we are because so much of our identity comes unconsciously from the taking away of other people's identity, right? And so
mm,
an opportunity now is here where we get to reclaim what it looks like to be connected to something deeper than ourselves so that we don't have to culturally appropriate, so that we don't have to take up space in ways that are violent and harmful to other people. And so I love your story, and I love that this has been a part of your journey, because I find that that's also been a part of my journey of understanding where I come from. Um, and what's interesting about my story, Becca, is that in many ways, I'm I'm from Brazil. I was born in Brazil, but I'm white. My lineage comes from a lot of Eastern European, but some of my family comes from the Iberian Peninsula. So it comes from Spain and Portugal,
mm,
which I think now we would see that as a person of color. A Spaniard, a Portuguese, they tend to have darker complexion. We may look at them and assume, person of color, or not assume, name them as a person of color. But what's interesting is that the Portuguese were actually the people who started the slave trade. I mean,
mm.
slavery can be traced directly back to like one Portuguese man, individual. And so it's really interesting to have that, the whiteness of my skin is actually the part that's not the colonizer, right? But it's the darker part of my skin, the
Mm,
Portuguese part of my skin that's actually the oppressor.
mm. Wow. That's some beautiful digging you're doing there. Yeah, when you dig past just the generic whiteness,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is truly a system of erasure, you can see the history of the people behind it. I mean, Brazil has like an immense and complicated history with colonization and slave trade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and there's so much healing being done and needing to be done in that culture, just as there's so much healing needing to be done and being done in the United States. The history, that's what I found to be really powerful in ancestral connection work, is it's also remembering and learning our history.
Yes.
I've been relearning the history of Europe, starting Neolithic. I've been watching YouTube videos starting with the Neolithic age and learning more about what old Europe was like pre-Indo-European, and then seeing what happened over this span of time and where it spread to. It's very clarifying for me about what my people and what our collective people went through and what was perpetuated and who was harmed. It's very clarifying, because I think whiteness can create this fog, this amnesia that I think I really heard from my living ancestors, who were like, they're all dead. It happened.
Yeah.
Here we are now. It's like, well, if we can see the line and have compassion for the times, and be like, what would I have chosen, if my neighbors were being burned at the stake and all these things, I think it brings a clarity to this work we're wanting to do, which is to feel a sense of home in ourselves and where we live, and to be better ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I often think that these spiritual concepts can sound so yummy. Like this idea of coming home to ourselves. It sounds so yummy, and it is yummy, right? It's amazing to land in your body, but I think we sometimes forget that in order to come home, truly home to ourselves, we have to be able to hold the stuff that's not so yummy, right? We
Mhm.
have to learn how to navigate the fact that our ancestors are colonizers, and that right now, if we continue to not look at our privilege, that we are now continuing to perpetuate the same systemic oppression that our ancestors contributed to. So it's like coming home to ourselves means being able to hold the complexity of being the oppressor, and that for many of us carry identities that are oppressed in our society, like being a woman. For me, it's like being an
Mm.
immigrant. It's really important that we learn how to be able to hold both, just like what you shared earlier. And I love that you said that. because sometimes I think that we choose to go fully like we're the oppressor. So then we get to feel a lot of shame, right? That
Mm.
white woman shame that you mentioned. And then we get to allow that to shut us down. But then sometimes we go fully on the other side and see ourselves only as oppressed and then feel really the victimization of our culture and not really know how to navigate that either. And so being able to hold both is so important.
Yes, I totally agree. I what helps me is when I look at this as systemic. I look at this as, thousands of years in the making to silence us, to quiet us down, to do whatever we don't do or do to perpetuate this system and this harm. And what I think the holding of the binaries are, or the holding of the dualities does for us, is it actually strengthens our resilience, makes us more flexible. We actually can care for our community in a deeper way. We can hold more complex emotions. We can have harder conversations. We can handle, like a Facebook troll a little bit more steadily in our nervous systems. We can do harder things. That's what I've found. There's the whole like spiritual bypassing thing of being just going to the light, just being positive. And like, I get the allure. I get the allure of that. And I actually think it's a maturing of our operating system to be able to hold both. And it takes practice, like I remember total system shutdown in the beginning stages of just like fully owning my white privilege. Like it felt unsafe in my system. And I've just noticed that the more I talk, that's why I'm like, yeah, ask me about who I'm descended from. It's healing for me to say it. It makes it easier for me to really, truly know why I'm here and what I'm doing and how to really show up for myself and for others.
Yeah. And I think it's really great what you said about the importance of doing the learning of the history of the lands in which we come from, as well as the history of the lands in which we live on.
Mm.
I think whenever I watch like a documentary, like on Netflix, they're doing this docu-series on each decade, right?
Mm.
The 60s and 70s and 80s, and watching the documentary of the 60s and 70s and the fight for justice that was going on at that time, is in so many ways the exact same conversations that we're having now. And seeing what people have gone through in the past gives me so much more context into how to see how things are happening right now. And
Mm.
if we, I love the quote that if we don't know history, what is it? We're doomed to repeat it. And I could not agree more. I think so many of us act like because we're so young that the people older than us don't really have anything to teach us. And I think that that's a real naivete that's keeping us sometimes in the cycle of repeating the same patterns instead of learning from those who have come before us.
Yes. Yes. Isn't that interesting? This like rejection of elders.
Yes.
I mean, that probably speaks to our dissociation with death and aging,
Mm-hmm.
but also the way we look at history as in some way being like more primitive or less
Mm-hmm.
evolved or something. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many ways you can apply that to the wisdom we're missing out on and the reverence we need to give for all that came before, for us to be here now with the wisdom we have now.
Yes. Oh, I couldn't have said it better myself. That, yes, 100%. And, how the gift that we have right now is in technology, is in being able to do things like these ancestry tests, which I understand there's a lot of trepidations around giving up your DNA. I don't know what the ramifications is of that. And
Hmm.
at the same time, like I loved getting that test and seeing on a map where I'm from. And
Hmm.
um, it gives me a sense of landing for a person like me who I moved to the United States when I was 7. So I was born in Brazil. I'm Brazilian, but when I go to Brazil, I don't really feel like I'm Brazilian. And when I'm
Hmm.
here, I don't really feel like I'm American. And so like I'm in a nowhere land, and having that knowledge of where the people in my life have come from, it gives me a landing.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I've heard from folks who identify as biracial as having a similar feeling, and there is something about getting the test, and or really learning the history of the lands on all sides, that feels a little bit more rooting than having to choose in this moment who you are, like how to identify.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really hear you in that.
Yeah. And so would love to hear a little bit more about for people who may be interested in learning how to connect with their ancestors in a meaningful way,
Hmm.
both to, being able to hold more of the truth of where they come from the perspective of possibly seeing that their ancestors did things that, they don't approve of, and also to connect to the lineage of strong women who have come before us and who have paved the way for us. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a link to a blog post I did that has like 10 things you can do. So the one that is coming through to me right now, which I just always trust implicitly, is so what has been able to survive the rise of empire has been the folk ways of our people. Folk, which is this word that means of the people
Mm.
and the people of the land. And so folk ways are food, dance, song, and story. And these are throughout time. So I know that it's been really important for me to learn the myths of the various people I'm from, right? This past couple years, it's really been Celtic myth, but I've started to lean more towards my father's side, which is Eastern European. I've been really interested in the lands now known as Poland and Germany, and how they celebrate their holidays, and what are the ancient holidays, what were the pre-Christian traditions, what are the dances and the songs, and then cooking the food of my people. So this could be
Mm.
your grandmother's favorite cherry pie or those cookies you always have at Christmas. But I've been going back and being like, what did my people who lived on cold, windy cliffs overlooking the ocean in the British Isles, what did they eat? They ate fish. They ate soup. Um, they were farmers and fishermen. So, what were the peasant food? It would be like, oh, that's how Scotch eggs came to be. It was a way to preserve the eggs and get protein. You could put it in a pouch and you could eat it throughout the day. It's what it has done, connecting to these folk ways of my people, is it's just opened up little parts of my heart, little parts of my cells, and
Mm.
it just like creates the next footstep and or weaves the next thread, and all of a sudden I'm like looking up celtic celtic braiding for hair and the different ways that a woman could show her political leanings, or if she was going to leave her husband, by the way she braided her hair. And then all of a sudden I'm on YouTube braiding my hair, and it's like all of this is a practice in reconnecting to who I'm from, as opposed to the story that I'm a cultureless white woman
Mm-hmm.
who then goes and, like sits in a sweat lodge and starts saying, aho, it's like, it's different. It's a different experience.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Oh, yes, it is a different experience. Recently, my partner and I made a very, very standard Brazilian dinner, rice, beans, a side of couve, which is collard greens,
Mm.
like really just something that like my grandmother makes every single day. Okay, first off, it took us like all day.
Yeah.
We burned like two of the dishes because we were trying to multitask of all of the things. And it was
Mm.
like, so it was so fun though. And it was joyous. And I realized like, wow, this not only brings me in a connection with my grandmother, but it also makes me realize just how much she's done for me and how much she's done for the family. And there's like a level of appreciation for what's so easy for her. So I love
Yeah.
that you recommended that. I think it can sound so simplistic, but it's actually so rich with meaning if we drop in and allow ourselves to get carried away in the research and the excitement and the curiosity and the exploration, just like what you've done about like the hair braiding, for example. You get to find these little things that give us so much meaning. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I think what's important, first of all, you have a beautiful way with words. Can I just tell you, it's like a song listening to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. The reason I suggested that one is because I think our Western brains want to make things complicated so that we can either
Yes,
put it off or feel like we're unworthy of it. And genealogy can feel really overwhelming, and
100%.
the DNA test can feel like a lot of things for a lot of people. And so this is a very tangible, easily accessible, and there's so many different ways you can connect to the folk ways of your people. It can be your grandmother's dish, or it could be YouTubing braiding, or it could be anything. And so that's really what I want to invite the folks listening to remember, is
Yeah.
that this is within us, and it's for all of us.
Yes, 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 yes. And one of the things that I know our ancestors had a different relationship with is with time.
Mm-hmm.
And that, at this point in time, at like today in 2019, the amount of information that is being sent our way at any given moment is like infinitely more than what most of our ancestors received in their lifetime, right? It's just so drastic, the expectation on our time and our ability to process what's happening. And so I would love to hear, what your thoughts are around that and how you've been navigating it and what has been coming up for you.
Mm. I've been in it feels like a battle for my life. And that is a very intense statement, but it has felt that way
Hmm.
in the past few months for me, with linear time. And I was introduced to this idea that time is a construct a few
Hmm.
years ago. And it took me a while to be like, what? But this idea of linear time being relatively new in human history, and really came from needing to know when to pray, from like old monks,
Hmm.
again in Europe. And that before then, um, all of our ancestors, no matter where they're from in the world, measured the passing of, quote, time by the sun and the moon and the seasons. And if you even think about those three things, they have a slower pace than a watch makes you feel,
Hmm.
and a Google calendar, and things make you feel. And so I have been in recovery from internalized capitalism, which measures my I've been measuring my inherent value and lovability by my busyness, and my ability to squeeze things into amounts of time that actually don't really hold them. I am reading this book I really love called It's About Time by Leslie Keenan, and I have self-diagnosed myself as what she calls a time binger. So someone who tries to put a lot of things into a small amount of time,
Mm.
which means for most of my life, I've struggled with feeling complete at the end of a day. And I've struggled with feeling like it was a good day,
Hmm.
because I never got enough done.
And
Because
of course, this is infinitesimally also augmented by being an entrepreneur. And
for sure.
because we don't have necessarily the systems or structures of other people in an organization to hold our kind of our productivity. So we really could just go wild if we wanted and never eat, never sleep.
Yeah.
So we are in charge of monitoring our own productivity, and that can be so difficult.
Well, I think it's very confronting to what your beliefs or the systems you were bought into, or the modeling of your family members, like it really just shows you. It's a really massive mirror for what you believe to be true about time and your worthiness. So I've been in this interesting dance where I was always like a head nod, like fist pump yes to, your productivity is not a measurement of your worth. And I was like, yeah,
Hmm.
totally, yeah, totally, yeah, totally. But within me, as I peel the layers of the onion and I get deeper and deeper into, the deepest parts of my soul and my being, I realized there is a connection, an ancestral connection to time and worth, particularly those of us who, and most of us are descended from people who were laborers or are laborers, where, I have on my father's side, factory worker, blue collar factory worker ancestors whose value was very much determined by how many things they could put together in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this whole concept of like 9 to 5 really comes from factory, like the industrial era time,
Mm-hmm.
treating us as machines.
Mm-hmm.
And then thinking about farm workers, agricultural laborers, which again, many of us, if not most of us, are descended from because the earth provided food. The earth
Mm-hmm.
provided food. And so there's this, I can see that gives me some compassion for my feelings of unworthiness around time, because it feels like, oh, this is deep.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't just be like, why can't you get over it, Becca, and just learn to rest and really embrace it? I'm like, oh no, this is actually a battle. And this is a deep healing for me. So I have no, like, I figured it out. Here it is. I'm in it. And I've noticed it's a paradigm shift of choosing to do less. So for me, I'm the time binger. So for me, it's saying no, and it's doing less, and it's having boundaries and holding to that, and also having compassion from an ancestral perspective, from a systemic perspective of noticing when those feelings of unworthiness or feelings of rushing or feelings, just asking myself, why am I feeling anxiety on a Monday morning? Like, what's this feeding? What's really going on here, has helped me in
Yeah.
this journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk a lot about this. This is a really sweet spot for me in my group program, Worthy Women Rise, because obviously we can't talk about worth without talking about productivity.
Mm.
And we can't talk about how we land and belong in our bodies if we're believing the cultural narrative that tells us that our time is actually and there's an expectation that we be the most productive human beings on the entire planet, and that our time is not ours, right? And we are not entitled to take up space in our own way, unless it's giving back to our culture. And so I love that you've been navigating this as well, and the questions that you ask, because I think that one of the first things that we must do is recognize just how inherent our worth is to our productivity. And I think we've all gotten a sense of this when we get sick unexpectedly, right? We get a cold, or we get food poisoning, we get something that's relatively minor. I'm not talking about huge medical emergencies. I'm talking about these little things where, well, maybe even the big things too, I'm sure it can make us feel like we're now bad people because we can't do what was on our to-do list, and that somehow that means that we're worthless, and that we should have taken better care of ourselves, and how dare us give ourselves permission to take time off.
Yes, I often feel when I get sick like I've failed, like I've somehow
Exactly.
failed.
Yes.
And that is interesting because um, I've had friends be like, oh, you're sick, just take care of yourself. I tell clients, like, oh, you give your body what it needs. And then I get sick and I'm like, wow, I'm having a lot of interesting stories happen in my head right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting how that happens. Yes. Everything that you said. Yes, yes, yes. And, it's just so interesting how the concept of rest can seem for so many of us as unnecessary.
Mm.
Like we don't need it. And then we are so surprised when our body shuts down. And something that I've been reminded again and again and again in my healing journey is that our body operates at a different time than our minds. That our minds may not even be able to keep up with it. Our brains are magical things. They can keep up with the speed of the world. We can do it, but our bodies, our soul, this container that houses our spirit cannot. And it would be a huge dishonoring if we don't pay attention to that.
Right. And I think what has helped me tremendously is shift into this trusting of the wisdom of the body as opposed to the frustration that my body can't keep up.
Yeah.
Because if you go into the frustration that your body can't keep up, it's a losing game.
Mm-hmm.
And when you lean into the body leading, it's such a relief for the brain, frankly, because the brain needs rest too.
Yeah.
But it means choosing a different pace of life, which is not always supported by society, by societal norms. So it's quite a courageous act, and that's why I talked about boundaries. It's about really excellent communication with all that interact with you. I'm going to operate at this pace. I'm not going to respond to your text message immediately. I only check email 3 times a week, whatever it is, to reinforce to your body that it's okay, I got you.
Yeah.
And to your brain, like, this is the new way of doing. Let's all do this together. It takes some shifting, but it's nothing but nourishing.
Mm-hmm. Do you follow the nap ministry on
I
Instagram?
just discovered the Nap Ministry, and I am here for it.
It is so good. It is so good. I highly recommend everyone go. I'll add it to the show notes, along with Becca's blog post. The NAP Ministry is an Instagram account that's really advocating for the liberation of naps. You know what I mean? Like, let
Yes.
us nap. And their posts are so poignant about
Yes.
how much our time is being capitalized by a society, by a structure that really does not give a shit about us.
Yes. And what I also love about this amazing account is how seriously it positions napping within these systems and for health, because I've found that talking about naps in like normative culture can sort of be jokey.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I'd love a nap, ha ha ha, or like, I took a nap, lucky you, fancy you.
Yeah.
And what I love about the Nap Ministry is it's really making it like we have a right. Our body has a right to this, and we need it, and you know it, and I know it, and yeah, it's like a birthright to nap, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. That's brilliant. I didn't even think about that. And you're totally on point, because it is a serious thing. You know, our health, our vitality, our wellness, it is ours. It is ours to own. And I think for so many of us, we have no idea just how violating culture has been in dictating our worth, our time, our productivity, you know, who we are in the world, when we're supposed to get married, when we're supposed to have children, when we're supposed to do all these things, and taking small steps towards reclaiming it, even if that's as something as, again, going back to simple but potent, something as simple as napping can really say to ourselves and prioritize to ourselves that our body is worth it. Our body is valuable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to be royalty to nap.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's also this thing that is in our culture, right, about the hustle. I was looking back through my business iterations, and I've been running a business on some capacity for 10 years, for most of my 20s. And I wrote a blog post a long time ago, I would say like 6-7 years ago, about mindful hustle. Which I think is so cute, this idea of being very mindful in our busyness. And now I'm questioning that. And I wonder if those things can be married together, if we can be mindful and perpetuate and be in a culture that pushes us to hustle beyond our breaking point.
That's very interesting. I think it's important to know what our definitions of hustle are. I think like hashtag hustle, like the like, I don't know, pop culture hustle vibe.
Yeah.
I cannot get down with.
Yeah.
I cannot get down with like the Beyonce has the same 24 hours in a day as you do hustle thing. Because that doesn't acknowledge a lot of things, but more than anything, I think it perpetuates the I'll sleep when I'm dead mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Mindful hustle. That's really interesting. I just hate that word hustle. I would say that I'm trying to re-engage with my ambition from a different place. I'm trying to re-engage with what work means, with what even pushing. I used to be super anti the word push, but I'm really coming back to that archetype that some would call masculine, of doing, from a healthy place.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with napping.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with listening to my body and knowing when enough's enough and being able to pivot and be flexible and all these things that I'm really rewiring. That's why this whole I mean, I remember second week of January, I was looking at my calendar on a Sunday night and I burst into tears and I thought, what is wrong with me? And I realized, I was being initiated into this deeper healing with time. I think that's a part of me rewiring this whole relationship I have with hustle, with
Mm-hmm.
work, with
Mm-hmm.
pushing, is like, how can we do this in a healthy way? But yeah, again, I think the pop culture definition of hustle is something I'm 100% no to.
Yeah, me too. And I love you are also artistic with words, my dear. So good. The re-engaging and the rewiring, those are the two words that stood out for me because that's really what it is. It is a full-on detox, a full-on restructuring of what it means to have ambitions, desires, goals, drives, and also to not. And
Yeah.
also to be relaxed in our stance towards life and be relaxed in our stance towards how much we do in a day, and recognizing that our doing is beautiful and being is beautiful, and yet none of those things dictate our validity of existing on this planet.
Yes, that.
Yeah.
Yes, that being is just as valuable as doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true when we're re-engaging and rewiring our relationships with doing and being and hustle and resting and all of that, to know that the system is really going to tell us something different. So do we have our own rubric? Do we have our own definitions, so
Mm-hmm.
that we're not wildly searching outside of ourselves for that knowing or that approval or that A+ or whatever, that lovability that we know where it is for us.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great place to end this conversation because I think that's it right there. Like
Mm.
we've got to establish what it means for us to feel good in our lives, independent of our culture, and then find a way to integrate because we do live in this
Yes.
culture and, resisting it isn't useful either. So any final thoughts, Becca, on all of this that you would like to share with us?
I think what's coming to me is for everyone listening to know that you're not alone in this what if it's a struggle or a feeling of like coming back around to the same pattern, to know that when we talk about it, when we give it the light of day, it's like a total release mechanism for deeper
Mm.
healing. And that, there might be some habits or belief systems programmed into you. I know perfectionism is a big one
Mm-hmm.
that'll keep you down, or that voice telling you, you suck or you can't do this or whatever it is. So I encourage you to talk about it in safe and brave spaces, because that will really be the healing path.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. I adore you. I adore your work in the world. I will be putting all of the links to all of the things on the show notes for people. Where is the best place that they can find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, Instagram or my website, beccapiastrelli.com, and Becca Piastrelli on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you, Becca, for being with us today.
Thank you so much.